Welcome to the captivating realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our exciting new stories. Enjoy the journey.
Viara Tan's head throbbed as she gradually regained consciousness. The last thing she remembered was celebrating with her human crewmates after a successful mission, downing a few shots of potent human liquor. But something felt off. Her body was ablaze, every nerve ending screaming with an aching need. She forced her eyes open, wincing at the harsh lights of the medbay. Dr. Seamers, the ship's medic, stood over her, his weathered face lined with concern. What happened? Viara croaked, her voice raspy. She attempted to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. You had a bad reaction to the whiskey, Seamers explained. Your unique physiology couldn't handle it. Viara groaned. Her people, the Orolans, were close relatives of humans, but with distinct differences, like her crimson hair, pointed ears, and the iridescent third eye in the center of her forehead. That eye opened now, taking in the doctor's aura. Normally, it glowed a soothing green, but now it pulsed an agitated red. There's something you're not telling me, she said, narrowing her eyes. What is it? Seamers sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. It seems the alcohol interacted badly with the standard military performance enhancement serum all soldiers receive. It boosts strength, stamina, reflexes, but in you, he trailed off, looking away. Viara's heart raced as realization dawned. The fire coursing through her veins, the desperate ache building in her core, she recognized these symptoms all too well from her species' mating cycles, but they had never been this intense before. It's triggered an extreme arousal response, Seamers stated clinically, still avoiding her gaze. Your hormone levels are off the charts. If we don't get this under control soon, you could go into shock. Viara wanted to scream, cry, or break something. This couldn't be happening, not here, not now. She was light years from home, the only Orlan on a ship full of humans. The shame of it threatened to overwhelm her. What can we do? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. I've consulted the database on Aurelian physiology. There's a sedative I can give you that should help take the edge off, but... Seamers met her gaze at last, his blue eyes filled with sympathy. The only thing that will truly relieve the symptoms is... well, giving in to them. Finding a willing partner to help you through this. Viara squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears leaking from the corners. The thought of propositioning one of her crewmates, of them seeing her in such a vulnerable, animalistic state, made her stomach churn. But what choice did she have? She couldn't very well take matters into her own hands in the medbay. I need some time to think, she said. Seamers nodded. Of course. I'll give you some privacy. Just hit the call button if you need anything. He stepped out, leaving Viara alone with her thoughts and the raging inferno threatening to consume her. She curled into a ball, hugging her knees to her chest as silent sobs racked her body. What kind of legendary soldier was she, brought low by a few shots of human booze? If her superiors back on Aurelia, the Nth, found out about this, she'd be stripped of her rank and sent home in disgrace. No, she resolved, gritting her teeth against a fresh wave of need. She would find a way to handle this discreetly, with minimal involvement from the crew. Viara Takhan was nothing if not resourceful. She'd faced down enemy troops and hostile wildlife in the cold void of space. She could deal with her own treacherous biology. Inhaling deeply, she uncurled her body and sat up, ignoring the throbbing response between her legs. First things first, she needed to get out of the medbay and back to her quarters. Grabbing a hospital gown, she slipped it over her sweat-soaked underclothes and peeked out into the corridor. The coast was clear. She darted out, keeping to the shadows and praying she wouldn't run into anyone. Luck was on her side, and she made it to her small cabin without incident. Shutting the door behind her, Viara leaned against it, her chest heaving. Her room, with its sparse furnishings and few personal effects, had never felt more like a sanctuary. Here, at least, she could suffer through this in private. Stripping off the hospital gown, she stumbled to the bed and collapsed onto it. The cool sheets felt amazing against her feverish skin. Unable to help herself, Viara ran her hands over her body, trying to ease the ache. A whimper escaped her as her fingers grazed over the sensitive peaks of her breasts, the taut plane of her stomach. This was wrong, shameful. If any of her crewmates knew she was debasing herself like this, they'd never look at her the same way again. But she was past caring. Her hips rocked restlessly against the mattress, desperate for some relief. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. She needed, the door chime sounded, making her freeze. Viara held her breath, hoping whoever it was would go away. No such luck. The chime sounded again, followed by a concerned male voice, Viara. It's Jim. Doc Seamers told me what happened. I just wanted to see if you're okay. Jim, her commanding officer and closest friend on the ship. The last person she wanted to see her like this. But the sound of his voice, usually steady and reassuring, sent a fresh wave of desire crashing through her. Viara bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. She knew she should send him away, claim exhaustion, anything, but she'd always harbored a secret attraction to the ruggedly handsome captain. Many a lonely night cycle, she'd fantasized about his strong hands on her, his firm body pressing her into the mattress as he made her his. Those illicit fantasies rushed back now, making her head spin and her core clench with need. Before she could second-guess herself, Viara staggered to the door and opened it. Jim stood there, his dark brows drawn together in concern, full lips turned down at the corners. His gaze swept over her, taking in her disheveled state and the thin sheen of sweat coating her blue-tinged skin. When his eyes met hers, they widened in shock. Viara, she didn't let him finish. Grabbing a fistful of his shirt, she pulled him into the room, sealing the door shut behind him. Jim stumbled but quickly steadied himself. What are you doing? He demanded. Seamers said you needed to rest. What I need. Viara panted, advancing on him, is you. Jim gaped at her, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Viara knew how she must look to him, her hair a wild tangle, her nipples straining against the thin fabric of her tank top, her arousal surely evident from the damp patch darkening the crotch of her panties. She looked like a female animal in heat, which, thanks to that damned serum reacting with her alien biology, was exactly what she was. If Jim rejected her now, she didn't know what she would do, but as she watched, Jim's expression morphed from shock to speculation to hunger. His dark eyes raked over her trembling body, zeroing in on her breasts, her hips, the juncture of her thighs. When he met her gaze again, his irises were nearly black, eclipsed by blown pupils. Are you sure about this, Viara? He asked, his voice low and rough. I don't want to take advantage, I've never been more sure of anything, she said fiercely, stepping into his space. She ran a bold hand down his chest, feeling the solid muscles beneath. I want you, Jim. I need you. Please, he muttered a curse, his control snapping. Large hands seized her hips, dragging her flush against him. Viara could feel the thick ridge of his arousal pressing insistently against her belly, making her head swim with want, then his mouth was on hers, hot and demanding. Viara opened for him eagerly, tangling her tongue with his as her hands fisted in his short hair. Jim kissed like he did everything else, with single-minded focus and intensity. It stole her breath and made her knees weak. He walked them backward until the edge of the mattress hit the backs of her thighs. Viara tumbled onto the bed, taking Jim with her. The delicious weight of him settled over her as he nestled between her thighs. She could feel the hard length of him pressing right where she needed him most, making her hips buck restlessly. Viara, Jim groaned against her neck. You're so hot. I've wanted you for so long. His words inflamed her further, knowing he desired her, maybe as much as she secretly lusted after him. Made her feel powerful and sexy and desperate all at once. Then take me, she demanded breathlessly. Jim let out a rough sound before kissing her again, his lips tracing a fiery path down her throat as his hands eagerly tugged at her clothes. Viara arched her back to assist him in removing her tank top, exposing her breasts to his intense gaze. He devoted his attention to her sensitive breasts, each touch igniting a blaze beneath her skin. Viara became engulfed in the sensations, her entire world narrowing to the points where their bodies intertwined. She held on to his broad shoulders as he moved over her, both of them pursuing the pleasure they craved. It didn't take long for Viara to begin shaking in his arms, her body trembling with overwhelming pleasure, his name escaping her lips in a breathy cry. Jim followed her into bliss with a low groan, shuddering against her as they collapsed together in a tangled mess of sweaty limbs. He pulled her close, planting gentle kisses on her damp forehead, and Viara nestled into his embrace, relishing the deep sense of safety in fulfillment. However, as the afterglow began to wane, she could feel the embers of desire flaring back to life in her belly. It was clear that one round would not be enough, especially considering how the serum had heightened her hormones. Jim must have sensed her growing restlessness, as he pulled back to meet her gaze, a rueful smile playing on his lips, clearly ready for more. "I'm not as young as I used to be. You know," he remarked, prompting a soft laugh from Viara as she traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "Oh, I think you'll manage just fine, Captain. The real question is, can you keep up?" A glint of challenge sparked in Jim's eyes, and he swooped down to capture her mouth in a heated kiss. "Sweetheart, you have no idea what awaits you," he promised against her lips, and he began to show her exactly what he meant. As Viara lost herself in their passionate connection once again, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, something good had come from this entire embarrassing situation. The following days passed in a whirlwind of fervent encounters, interspersed with short breaks for rest and re-energizing. Viara was insatiable, the serum coursing through her veins like wildfire, intensifying her desires. Jim admirably rose to the occasion, matching her fervor with his own seemingly endless passion. But even the formidable captain had his limits. On the fourth day, Viara awoke to find him asleep beside her, softly snoring. She took a moment to admire how the starlight illuminated his chiseled features, a warm smile curling her lips. However, her smile faded as she became aware of the persistent ache between her thighs. The serum's effects showed no sign of subsiding. In fact, the need was growing stronger, bordering on painful. She needed relief, and she needed it now, casting an apologetic glance at Jim's sleeping form. Viara quietly slipped out of bed and threw on a robe. She padded barefoot through the quiet halls of the ship, her mind racing. She headed to the med bay, hoping that Seamers had come up with a solution by now. Bursting into the medical bay, she startled the doctor, who was focused on his microscope. "Please tell me you have good news," she blurted out, her urgency evident. Seamers blinked at her, taking in her wild expression and disheveled appearance, concern flickering across his face. "Ah, Viara, I was just about to call for you," he said, momentarily easing the tension in her chest. Hope surged within her. "Did you find a way to counteract the serum?" she asked eagerly. "Not exactly." Seamers replied, gesturing toward the microscope. "I've been analyzing your blood samples, and I've discovered something unusual." Viara's heart sank at his grave tone. "Unusual? How?" she pressed, anxiety creeping in. "The serum appears to be mutating," Seamers explained, his expression serious. "It's bonding with your unique Aurelian physiology in unexpected ways. Unfortunately, the effects are not only persistent but also contagious." Viara stared at him in horror, struggling to grasp the full implications. "Contagious? I mean that anyone you've been in close contact with since your exposure is likely infected as well," he clarified, his voice calm but firm. Just then, as if on cue, the med bay door slid open, and Jim stumbled in, his eyes glazed and his skin flushed. "Viara," he panted, breathless, "I need." Viara turned to Seamer, panic rising within her as she clawed at her throat. "What have I done?" The doctor raised a calming hand. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We need to run some tests on the captain to confirm the transmission." But Jim was not in a state for tests. He moved closer to Viara, his gaze intense. "I can't think straight," he growled. "All I can focus on is being with you." Viara stepped back, caught between longing and fear. This was all her doing. She had infected Jim with the cursed serum, transforming him into a mindless creature of desire. She needed to resolve this. "Doctor, sedate him," she commanded, her voice trembling. Seamers hesitated. "I'm not sure how the sedative will interact with the mutated serum." "Just do it," Viara insisted, her tone firm. The doctor readied a hypospray and cautiously approached Jim. The captain snarled, his eyes locked on Viara. Seamers jabbed the hypospray into Jim's neck and pressed the plunger. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Jim's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Viara felt a wave of relief wash over her, guilt knotting her stomach. She knelt beside Jim, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'll make this right, I promise." Straightening, she declared, "Doctor, I need you to induce a coma." Seamers stared at her in disbelief. "What?" "Viara, no. We don't know what that could do to you in your current state." "We have no choice," Viara replied resolutely. "I'm a threat to the crew like this. If I'm unconscious, I can't infect anyone else while you search for a cure." The doctor looked as though he wanted to argue, but the determination on Viara's face made him reconsider. "Very well," he conceded, his voice heavy. "But I want it on record that I object to this plan." "Noted," she replied, climbing onto the biobed, trying to ignore the lingering, unfulfilled need pulsing through her. As Seamers prepared the sedative, Viara closed her eyes, silently praying to any deity that might be listening. "Please let Seamers find a cure. Let Jim be okay. Let this all be a bad dream." The hissing of the hypospray against her neck was the last thing she felt before slipping into oblivion. Viara drifted in a haze of dreams and memories, disconnected from her physical self. Time became irrelevant in this in-between state of sleep and waking. She could have been under for minutes or months, she had no way of knowing. Fragments of conversation floated through the fog, disjointed and vague, mutating faster than I can isolate it. More crew members showing symptoms. Running out of time. We need to try something drastic. A sharp prick in her arm jolted Viara back to a groggy semi-consciousness. She opened her heavy eyelids, squinting at the blurry figure hovering above her. "What?" Her tongue felt thick and sluggish. "Viara, can you hear me?" The figure came into focus. Revealing Dr. Seamers, his face etched with fatigue and concern. "I had to wake you. I'm sorry, but we're out of options." Viara struggled to sit up, her muscles weak from disuse. Seamers helped her, propping pillows behind her back. "What happened?" she croaked. "How long was I out?" 3 weeks, Seamers said grimly. "And it's only gotten worse. The serum has spread through most of the crew." He swallowed hard. "They're like animals, driven solely by primal urges. If we don't find a solution soon, we'll have a full-blown orgy on our hands." Viara's heart sank. 3 weeks. She had left Jim and the others to manage on their own while this substance ravaged them. What kind of teammate was she? "What do you need me to do?" she asked, bracing herself. She would do anything to save her crew, her friends, her lover. Seamers held up a syringe filled with a thick green liquid. "This is a concentrated dose of the original serum before it mutated. I believe that introducing it into your system could reset the mutation and restore the serum's original purpose." Viara eyed the syringe warily. "You want to give me more of the substance that caused this chaos?" "I know it's a risk," Seamers admitted, "but if it works, we can create more and distribute it to the affected crew members. It's our last hope." Viara briefly closed her eyes, gathering her courage. Then she extended her arm, exposing the inside of her elbow. "Do it." The doctor nodded solemnly and inserted the needle into her vein. The serum burned like ice fire as it coursed through her bloodstream, making her gasp. For a terrifying moment, the overwhelming lust surged back to life, causing her back to arch off the bed. But then, mercifully, it began to fade. The unnatural craving ebbed away, leaving only a comforting warmth and a profound sense of relaxation. Viara leaned back against the pillows, tears of relief welling in her eyes. "Well?" Seamers asked anxiously. "How do you feel?" Viara took a deep, shuddering breath. "Normal," she said in wonder. "I feel normal." A slightly hysterical laugh escaped her. "I can't believe it worked." The doctor beamed. "Excellent. I'll begin synthesizing more of the serum immediately. With any luck, we'll have the crew back to their former selves soon." Viara swung her legs over the side of the bed, pleased when they supported her weight. "I need to see Jim. I have to apologize." "Viara, wait." Seamers grabbed her arm, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something you need to know first." A chill of dread formed in Viara's stomach at his tone. "What is it?" The doctor hesitated, searching for the right words. The serum didn't just heighten libido, it also lowered inhibitions, making people act on their deepest desires without restraint. Viara frowned, not understanding. "Okay, so." Seamers took a deep breath. "It seems that Enan Vala has had feelings for the captain for some time, and under the influence of the serum, she acted on those feelings." The world spun around Viara as the implications sunk in. Vala, the shy and reserved Vulcan science officer, had seduced Jim, her Jim. "I see," she said woodenly. "Thank you for telling me." Seamers reached for her, his eyes filled with sympathy, but Viara pulled away, unwilling to accept comfort. She felt numb, hollow. It was irrational to blame Jim or Vala for what had transpired. They were under the influence of an alien substance and not in control of their actions. Yet, the knowledge that Jim had been with someone else, had given himself to another woman in the heat of passion, even if it was not entirely his fault, cut deep into her heart. "If you'll excuse me, doctor," she said stiffly, "I need to get back to my ship." She turned on her heel and left the med bay, her back straight and her head held high. She would not let herself break. She would not show weakness. She was a soldier, and her crew needed her now more than ever. But inside, her heart was shattered. Viara walked briskly through the ship's corridors, her mind racing. She needed to find Jim, to talk to him, to ensure he was all right. But a part of her dreaded that conversation. Fearing the guilt and regret she would see in his eyes, when she reached his quarters, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the door chime. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it. "Come in." Jim's voice called, sounding weary. The door slid open, and Viara stepped inside. Jim was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Viara," he breathed, standing up. "You're okay." Viara's throat tightened at the sheer relief in his voice. "I'm okay," she confirmed. Seamers found a cure. Jim closed his eyes for a moment. "Thank God." "Viara, I'm so sorry for what I did, for what happened." "It wasn't your fault," Viara replied gently. "You weren't in control." "But I should have been," Jim said harshly. "I'm the captain. It's my duty to maintain control no matter what, and I failed. I failed the crew, and I failed you." Viara crossed the room to him, cupping his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Jim. You did not fail. You were infected with an alien substance that stripped away your inhibitions. What happened with Vala, it wasn't you." Jim searched her face, his eyes filled with anguish. "But it was me, Viara." A part of her desired him, even if she knew she would never act on it. How could one forgive such feelings? Viara's heart tightened at the thought. The reality was that she was uncertain if she could forgive him completely. The awareness that Jim had some hidden desire for another woman cut deeply, like a knife. Yet, as she looked into his tortured eyes and saw the self-recrimination and guilt consuming him, she realized that for both their sakes, she had to make an effort. "I forgive you," she declared with conviction. "I forgive you because I love you, Jim, and I know you love me. What happened doesn't change that." Jim's breath hitched, and tears glimmered in his eyes. "I love you, Viara, more than anything. I'm truly sorry for hurting you." Viara embraced him fiercely, feeling his arms wrap around her in a tight grip. They held each other for a long time, finding comfort in the warmth of their closeness. Eventually, Viara pulled back, wiping away her tears. "Okay," she said, taking a shaky breath. "We'll get through this together." Jim nodded, a tentative smile forming on his lips as he agreed. Just then, the door chimed. Viara and Jim exchanged a glance before Jim called out, "Come in." Dr. Seymour entered, a triumphant smile on his face. "I did it," he proclaimed. "I synthesized enough serum to treat the entire crew. We're administering it now." Relief washed over Viara like a wave. The nightmare was finally ending. "That's fantastic, Doc," Jim said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Seymour dismissed the praise. "I was just doing my job, Captain, but I couldn't have succeeded without Viara. Her bravery to be a guinea pig and risk herself saved us all." Viara lowered her gaze, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. "I was just doing what had to be done," she mumbled. Jim took her hand, entwining their fingers. "You were incredibly brave," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you, Viara." She squeezed his hand, a lump in her throat. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "Knowing you were waiting for me and needed me gave me the strength to keep fighting." Jim pressed their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with fervor. "I'll always need you, Viara." "Always." Dr. Seymour cleared his throat, looking a bit awkward. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, retreating toward the door. "I need to oversee the remaining treatments anyway." "Thanks again, Doc," Jim called as the door slid shut. He turned to Viara, his gaze soft and warm. "Alone at last," he murmured, pulling her close. Viara willingly melted into his embrace, tilting her face up for his kiss. Their lips met in a gentle caress, reaffirming the love and commitment they shared. When they parted, Jim rested his forehead against hers. "I know we still have a lot to work through," he said quietly, "but I want you to understand, Viara, you are everything to me. You're my forever." Tears welled in Viara's eyes. "You're my forever too, Jim. No matter what happens or what challenges we face, I'll always be by your side." "I like the sound of that," Jim replied, a smile breaking across his face. "You and I, side by side, ready to take on the universe." Viara grinned, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. "The universe won't know what hit it." Hand in hand, they stepped out of Jim's quarters, ready to tackle whatever the future held for them. Together, in the days that followed, life aboard the Endeavour gradually returned to normal as the crew recovered from the effects of the mutated serum. There were a few awkward moments, blushes, and averted gazes as people recalled their uninhibited actions, but overall, there was a sense of camaraderie in shared triumph over adversity. They had faced this challenge as a team and emerged stronger. For Viara and Jim, the path to recovery took a bit longer. Trust had been shaken, and insecurities revealed, but they approached it with the same determination and commitment they always brought to challenges. Through long, honest discussions and a dedication to rebuilding their connection, they gradually healed the rift between them. As they did, their relationship evolved, deepening in unexpected ways. The crisis surrounding the serum had acted as a catalyst, compelling them to confront their feelings and discover what they truly desired. They realized they wanted a future together, not just as captain and lieutenant, but as partners in every sense. It wouldn't be easy to balance their personal and professional lives, but they were ready to put in the effort to fight for this precious bond. in quiet moments stolen between shifts, in gentle touches and loving glances, they reaffirmed their commitment to one another. Slowly, but surely, they constructed something beautiful and resilient, a love that could withstand any storm. The Endeavour sailed on through the stars, her crew united and unbreakable, prepared for whatever challenges the universe decided to throw their way. Because together, they could face anything. Together, they were unstoppable.